Well, I can tell you all that I'm absolutely ecstatic to be here tonight. So, Thursday afternoon, May 10th. Wow, geez, 55 weeks ago today. I woke up and I realized I was in a hospital room, in a hospital bed. And beside the bed was my wife, Betsy. And I leaned over and asked her a question, and she couldn't understand one thing that I said. But she would tell me that was in the ICU and had a stroke. And of course, a bolt of fear sliced right through my gut because the images in my mind for stroke were wheelchair and care homes and never being the same. So the stroke had happened 2 days before as I was driving home, and it resulted in an emergency surgery at Peace Health where neurosurgeons ran a wire through my groin up into the back of my neck and cleared a clot at the base of my brainstem, which controls breathing. So my caregivers would tell me over the next few days that my nickname in the hospital was the Miracle Man because the stroke should have been fatal. Within a few minutes of me waking up, a neurologist came to give me an examination. And he asked me if I could lift my foot onto my left leg and slide it up and down. I could barely lift my foot. It felt like a 500-pound lead weight, and there was a feeling of just total exhaustion. And you see, the vast majority of all strokes are a blockage of blood flow into the brain. We've got over 100,000 miles of blood vessels in our brains. And once the blood is blocked, we lose 2 million neurons, 2 million brain cells every minute. The average stroke victim will be robbed of 1.2 billion neurons. And the significance of that is that each neuron can be connected to as many as 7,000 to 10,000 others in networks that are all linked together. And so even the loss of a few brain cells can have a catastrophic impact. We all know that hospital time can be slow time. The first things that I started to do to try to recover were to relearn the not-so-simple skill of swallowing so that I could feed myself and take care of myself. And I would sit for hours with my wife, Betsy, and moving the Kleenex box, the cup of water, left and right, up and down on my little table tray because a doctor had come in and said the left side of my body was more affected by the stroke and weaker, and that I had to send a clear message to my brain that everything still worked. It took them about a week to get me transferred to the brain injury wing of the hospital, where I would enter a very aggressive, top-notch stroke therapy program, 3 hours a day of physical, speech, or occupational therapy. And this is where I first heard the term neuroplasticity. You see, for hundreds of years, science and medicine had told us, once your brain's broken, it can't be fixed. But we've learned that we are never stuck with the brain that we have. We can always make it better. Anytime you learn a new fact or a new skill, your brain has changed. By the end of tonight, after you've heard all 7 of these talks, your brains will be changed. And a perfect example of that is my first PT session. My physical therapist asked me, Jim, is there anything specific you'd like to accomplish? I told her, yeah, I'd like to get out of this walker. And I could see by the look in her eye that she didn't think we were going to get that done today. But we plunged ahead and worked hard with a lot of repetitive exercise for about 60 minutes and worked on techniques for my balance. And at the end of 60 minutes, she felt comfortable that I would be safe using the cane. And when you're stuck in a hospital room, your world becomes very, very small. So it was another 9, what seemed like endless days, before they would be ready to release me. And I was excited to go home. But it was just the start of a series of very, very humbling experiences. They'd recommended that I walk a lot. And so my first walk, the first 10 yards, I realized I had to have my wife, Betsy, stand shoulder to shoulder on my right-hand side, otherwise I would fade out into the street. And I would like to say that the reality is that image of her standing shoulder to shoulder to me is really the secret weapon of why I've been able to recover so quickly. So, babe, I'd like to say I love you and thank you for all your support. And so after about 10 days, like a good athlete, I decided I would time my walk. It took 11 minutes, and that equates to a 55-minute mile. And for a guy who would run 8-minute miles, that was pretty disheartening. More important is this cane felt so awkward, I didn't feel like I was making any progress. By that time, I'd gotten into the outpatient program at Peace Health, and my first occupational session, I got to use this cool light board, a 4-foot by 3-foot screen with flashing red LED lights that we would turn off, and I can still hear the voice of my therapist saying, "You know, Jim, you met the standard of an 85-year-old man." I lost 20 years of my brain. Later that afternoon at the speech therapy, my therapist asked me if I could give her a list of 10 things that I might go shopping for at a dollar store. After 3, my brain basically just stopped functioning. I couldn't even bring to bear, like, you know how when you concentrate hard, I couldn't even do any focus or anything. I just sat there blankly staring at her, and I felt possibly the most helpless I've ever felt in my entire life. I signed up for a brain training website to help me with brain speed and memory and attention. And after the first couple sessions, my ranking across the millions of website users was down at the 42nd percentile. But perhaps the absolute most painful was playing Uno with my 5-year-old granddaughter, and halfway through the game having her stand up and say, "Papa Jim, you are too slow." And then she walked away. And I thought, man, what's it going to be like? How can I keep up with her at 7 or 8? And so at that time, I'd also been reading ravenously about neurogenesis. You see, we've discovered that our brain actually makes new neurons. And this is a big if we nurture them properly, they'll survive and they can get wired into our existing networks and actually renew and upgrade our brains. So you might imagine I was really enthusiastic about that idea. And I was doing all kinds of stuff related to neurogenesis. And so I'm not going to try and share with you guys everything that I was doing because, number one, I don't have enough time. Number two, in many ways, it's actually pretty boring because recovery is really just mostly hard work for a long time. But a couple of things I would like to share is that within the 3 pounds that we carry in our skull are more neuronal connections than there are stars. This is the most magnificent creation of our entire universe. You've got one. Stop taking it for granted. Let me step back and talk about how awkward it was with this cane. At the hospital one day, I saw a fellow brain patient, and he had hiking poles. And I thought, I've got hiking poles. And my hiking buddy, Eddie Allen, had given me little rubber tips so I could use them in the street. And so as soon as I got home that day, I grabbed my hiking poles and I took a walk. And what I found out was I was still slow as hell. But I was a little more natural and a little more comfortable. And within a couple days, I'd gone from walking 1 block to 3 blocks. And by the 4th of July, I had gotten enough strength and stamina that I could return to walking my dog out on the Salmon Creek Trail 3.5 miles, which I began to do religiously 4 days a week. That and taking bar 3 classes out in Philida for balance. Wow. For balance and mindfulness, and the pace of my stroke recovery dramatically accelerated. You see, our brains have a chemical called BDNF, and it's called Miracle-Gro for the brain. And so when we walk, our brain gets bathed in that BDNF. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but every step I was taking walking was healing my brain and consolidated all the learning that I have. So how does this apply to any of you? If you haven't had a stroke, you're still just like me. You're suffering from that scourge of humanity, progressive AGE. And what we all accept as normal aging is really just a byproduct of our neurotoxic lifestyles that slows our brains down years before it should. The second way I know this applies to you is I've already been honored to hear all of our speakers tonight. And woven within the fabric of every talk are examples of neuroplasticity. Each talk has someone who had to rewire their brain to overcome their challenge. Keep your antenna peeled, or keep your antenna up to see if you can see those and figure out how to apply them to your life. You guys, we are in the midst of a brain revolution that even our kids and grandkids may not see the end of. Across many disciplines, from neuroscience to mental health to treatment of diseases like Parkinson's, concussions, PTSD, Alzheimer's, and dementia. In the athletic world, in studies of longevity, we're just writing the first chapters of our brain's user's manual. So the lesson that I've learned is that my life is totally dependent, the quality of my life is totally dependent on the quality of my brain. And I will never stop fighting to make my brain better. Neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, they gave me my full life back. They're tremendous tools. Learn how to use them. The benefit you'll gain is a longer and more joyful life. Thank you.